Hi guys, welcome to Tale Talk. As promised, today we're doing the first episode in a series on video games, and I decided to do an entire series on video games, not just one video, because storytelling, when it comes to storytelling in video games, there's so many things to say and there's so many things that can be looked at and are interesting that I think it would not do it justice to crowd everything in just one video. Right, so today we have a few points to talk about. The theme for this first episode is conflict. Today we're going to talk about storytelling and conflict. Now, every story in general, every story that you can narrate, every story that you have probably been part of, and surely every story that you have either read or seen on TV runs on one type of fuel. And that fuel is conflict. There's no story in the world that does not run on this fuel, namely conflict. It is conflict alone that keeps you reading. It is conflict alone that keeps you in the seat at the cinema watching the movie, and it's conflict alone that keeps players hooked in order to get to the end of the game and survive, right? And so that was this whole idea of conflict as fuel of a story. But what is conflict? We talk about conflict, but what is conflict? A conflict arises when there's a desire, and that desire has different barriers in front of it. For example, let's have the archetypal prince or a brave knight on a horse, and then the prince is locked in the tower, right? And then the princess is guarded by a fearless dragon, right? And then the prince or the brave knight has to save the princess, right? That's the archetypal conflict in a story. Now, those elements that make up this conflict, right? The princess, the tower, the dragon, the brave knight, the whole journey in itself. These are elements that come up again and again in all the stories that we know, all the stories that we read every day. Now, every story and every conflict has a set of sub-conflicts. Sub-conflicts are strictly related to the main conflict, right? On his journey to the tower, to the castle, and to that dragon, the brave knight will encounter different challenges, different tasks, right? Different other knights or different characters that might impede him on his journey. Then, when we talk about conflict, we should also mention two things. While the story is running, the reader, the viewer, the player is still in the process of getting the conflict to its resolution. But then when the story and the conflict is resolved, the story needs to stop. The narrator needs to stop the story. Without conflict, there's no story. A story turns bad when conflict stops, but the story doesn't. Now, the next thing is the conflict of a story leads the player, coming back to video games, leads the player to a unique experience, an experience that he could not have in real life. That's why people go to video games instead of movies or other let's call them platforms for storytelling. They go to video games because video games provide the adventure you cannot possibly be part of or experience in real life. Now, that experience, that adventure, that unique adventure cannot exist without conflict, right? So let me give you two examples. Those of you who know things about video games and have been playing, at least recently, video games, you might know what I'm talking about. First game, and actually one of my favorite stories when it comes to storytelling in video games, is Far Cry 3, right? Now in Far Cry 3, we have the main character, Jason Brody, who wants to, we'll come back to that word, who wants to save a group of friends, including his brother, from an island that is run by psychopaths who have kidnapped them for money, right? That's the plot, that's the conflict, right? He wants to save these people from the island, from the hands of these psychopaths. Or another example would be Uncharted 2, where Nathan Drake has to discover, or wants to discover, or rediscover a lost treasure, but at the same time there's another character who's chasing the same treasure in order to make himself inhumanly powerful, right? So there's two conflicts, and both of these conflicts, I said I'm going to come back to the word want, right? Desire. Both conflicts are based or run on this whole idea, I want to, right? My desire is to accomplish this, right? Whereas in general, video games are a media or a platform that help people accomplish things, right? Now, when writing a story and trying to come up with a realistic, or rather believable, conflict, we run into this question. What is at stake? What is at stake in this story? Now, some people might think that a very powerful and life-threatening conflict, life and death kind of context might make a story more powerful. That's not the case, right? It's not the case in writing, right? And it's not the case in video games. Why is that? Because the way the conflict is perceived is not it being presented as big, but when it feels big, right? For example, probably everybody knows the game Pac-Man, right? The conflict there is very simple, right? You have to run away from ghosts who will eat you if not, right? It's not at all. It's very minimal, it's very simplistic, it's very simple, but when you're running from those ghosts in those labyrinths, it feels real, right? It feels big. Your life is at stake, right? As a character and you as a player, right? So, what's at stake? At stake is you need to make the player feel the conflict, right? It has to feel big. It doesn't have to be presented as big, right? So, what did we talk about today? Today we talked about, or we looked at what conflict is, right? Conflict is a desire in front of which barriers are put up and different other sub-conflicts arise on the journey to get to solve the conflict. And then we said that sub-conflicts are related to the main conflict and lead, of course, to its resolution. And then we said that a story has to stop, or it does stop, when conflict is solved. And then in a video game, conflict is very crucial because it is the key to the heart of the player. It's the ingredient that assures or ensures that the unique adventure the player comes to get or experience is given or is provided. And then finally, the stakes of the conflict. A conflict doesn't need a huge presentation. It just needs to be presented or made. The player needs to feel that the stakes are high. It feels huge when everything that is at stake is very important to the character the player is cheering for. Now, guys, that was the first episode, or this is the first episode in a longer series on video game storytelling. Again, as I said, there's too many things to say about it in order to crowd everything in just one video, and probably that video would be way too long. So I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have, please like the video, share it if you will, and be on the lookout for episode number 2. Thank you guys. See you. Bye.